Jacob leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The soft glow of his computer screen cast a pale blue light across his face, illuminating the furrow in his brow as he reviewed the financial reports. Another late night, another day of relentless work, just like every other one in his high-powered corporate career. But it wasn't work that weighed heavy on his mind tonight. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. He glanced at the screen and smiled, the tension in his face momentarily easing. It was Matt, his best friend since college. "Grab a beer?" the message read. Jacob sighed. It was tempting. The idea of letting loose, even if just for an hour, felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. He hadn't seen much of Matt lately, despite the fact they lived in the same city and had once been inseparable. Jacob and Matt had grown up together in a sense. Although they met in college, they'd clicked instantly, as though the universe had designed their lives to intersect. There were no secrets between them, or so Jacob thought. Matt was everything Jacob was not. Outgoing, spontaneous, someone who wore his heart on his sleeve and seemed to navigate life with an effortless charm. Jacob, on the other hand, was methodical, introverted, a man who approached everything, even friendship, with careful deliberation. Yet somehow, their opposite natures had fused together to form an unbreakable bond. When Matt married Claire, a vibrant, witty woman who radiated warmth, Jacob couldn't have been happier. Claire was perfect for Matt. She balanced his wild impulses with a gentle pragmatism, and over the years, Jacob grew close to her as well. The three of them were a team, and for a time it seemed like nothing could shake the foundations of their friendship. But life, with its twists and turns, had other plans. It was a Sunday afternoon when Matt and Claire invited Jacob over for lunch. Jacob arrived with a bottle of red wine, as he always did, feeling the familiar comfort of their home wrap around him as he stepped inside. The smell of Claire's famous roasted chicken wafted from the kitchen, and Matt was in the living room, fiddling with the stereo. "Jacob!" Claire's voice rang out with its usual warmth as she emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She gave him a hug, and for a moment Jacob allowed himself to forget the stress of his work. Here, in their home, everything felt right. "Wine?" Jacob asked, handing her the bottle. "You know me too well," she smiled. "Go sit. I'll get the glasses." Jacob wandered into the living room and slumped onto the couch beside Matt, who had successfully coaxed an old classic rock tune out of the stereo. Matt gave him a lopsided grin, his eyes sparkling with the kind of mischief Jacob had come to expect. "You look like you've been buried in paperwork for weeks," Matt teased, slapping him on the back. "You need to get out more, man." Jacob laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, work's been crazy. You know how it is." Matt's expression grew more serious then, and he lowered his voice. "Listen, there's something Claire and I want to talk to you about." Jacob raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" Before Matt could answer, Claire entered with the wine glasses, setting them down on the coffee table. She poured each of them a glass before sitting down across from Jacob. The air in the room shifted, and Jacob could feel the weight of something unspoken hanging in the air. Matt cleared his throat, looking at Claire for support. She nodded, her eyes soft but filled with uncertainty. "Jake," Matt began, his tone uncharacteristically sober. "We've been trying to have kids for a while now, but—" He hesitated, glancing at Claire. "It hasn't been working." Jacob nodded slowly, unsure where this conversation was heading. He had known they were trying. Claire had mentioned it in passing a few times, but they had never gone into detail. "We've seen specialists," Claire continued, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "And after months of tests, we found out that Matt can't— well, it's not likely that he'll be able to father a child." Jacob felt a pang of sympathy for his friend, but still didn't understand what they were asking of him. "We've thought about all the options," Matt said. "Adoption, IVF, even donor sperm." He paused, his gaze locking with Jacob's. "But then Claire and I started talking and we realized we don't want just anyone. We want someone we trust, someone who would love the child as much as we would." Jacob's heart began to race as the realization hit him. His eyes flicked from Matt to Claire and then back to Matt. "You're asking me," Jacob began, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're asking you to be the father," Claire finished for him, her voice gentle but firm. Jacob sat in stunned silence, the weight of their request crashing over him. He had always wanted children, but his own romantic life had been a series of fleeting, meaningless relationships. He wasn't sure he would ever settle down or find the right person. Now, Matt and Claire were offering him something he had never imagined, fatherhood, but in the most unconventional way possible. I don't know what to say, Jacob finally managed. You don't have to say anything right now, Claire said softly. We know this is a lot to ask. Take your time. Matt leaned forward, his expression earnest. You're our best friend, Jake. If anyone's going to do this, it should be you. The kid would have a great life, and we'd make sure they always knew how much you meant to us. Jacob nodded, his mind spinning with the implications. Could he do this? Could he father a child for his best friend and watch them grow up as part of a family that wasn't his? It seemed surreal, yet also strangely right. He had always loved Matt and Claire like family, but was that enough? I need to think about it, Jacob said, his voice hoarse. Of course, Claire replied. Take all the time you need. Jacob left their house that afternoon with a whirlwind of thoughts in his head. He walked through the city, replaying the conversation over and over again, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling inside him. He loved Matt and Claire, but this was a monumental decision, one that would change all of their lives forever. The days stretched into a week, and Jacob couldn't stop thinking about the possibility of being a father. It tugged at something deep within him, a yearning he hadn't fully acknowledged before. But there was also fear. Fear of what it would mean for his relationship with Matt, for his connection to Claire, and for the child they were asking him to help bring into the world. After nearly 2 weeks of sleepless nights, Jacob made his decision. Jacob stood outside Matt and Claire's house, his heart pounding in his chest. He had practiced the words in his head 100 times, but now, as he stood on the threshold, uncertainty gripped him. This was it. The moment that would alter the course of their lives. Claire opened the door with a warm smile, but there was a hint of anxiety behind her eyes. She led him inside where Matt was waiting in the living room, pacing nervously. When he saw Jacob, he stopped, his face a mix of hope and fear. Jacob took a deep breath, then spoke the words he had rehearsed so many times. I'll do it. Relief washed over Matt and Claire's faces, and for a moment the three of them stood there in silence, the enormity of what they were about to embark on sinking in. We can't thank you enough, Matt said, his voice thick with emotion. This means everything to us. Claire stepped forward, her eyes filled with gratitude. You have no idea how much this means, Jacob. You're giving us the greatest gift. Jacob smiled, but underneath the surface he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something far more complicated than any of them realized. The process began slowly, methodically. Matt and Claire went through the necessary medical appointments, discussing the various options for insemination. They decided on artificial insemination, agreeing that it was the most straightforward way to approach the situation. Throughout it all, Jacob remained composed, doing his best to keep the emotional distance necessary to avoid complications. Yet as the days passed and the reality of fatherhood loomed closer, Jacob found it harder to detach himself from the idea that he was about to become a father, even if not in the traditional sense. The thought of his child growing up with Matt and Claire, of watching them raise the child while he remained on the sidelines, began to gnaw at him in ways he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't that he regretted his decision, he had made his choice willingly, but the emotional complexity of the situation was far greater than he had imagined. Keep a lookout for part 2 of this video titled The Dark Turn.